The world was burning. Europe lay in ruins, cities turned to ash, and humanity stood at the edge of darkness. Adolf Hitler's armies marched across continents, crushing nations beneath the shadow of the swastika. In the east, Japan's empire stretched like a wildfire through Asia, and Mussolini's fascists trampled freedom in the Mediterranean. The year was 1941, and for a moment, it seemed that evil would triumph. The world cried for help. But across the ocean, one nation stood silent, strong, industrial, and waiting. The United States of America. The world before America entered. Before the U.S. entered the war, Europe had fallen into chaos. France was crushed in only 6 weeks. Britain stood alone, its skies filled with the thunder of German bombers. The Soviet Union, despite its size, faced the largest invasion in human history, Operation Barbarossa. Millions were dying, and democracy was fading fast. In Asia, Japan had already conquered Manchuria, China, and Southeast Asia. The world was bleeding, and yet, across the Atlantic, America watched and waited. Isolation was the policy. Americans had seen the horrors of the First World War and promised themselves, never again. But destiny had other plans. The sleeping giant. President Franklin D. Roosevelt saw the storm before others did. He knew that if tyranny won in Europe and Asia, freedom everywhere would die. So quietly, the United States began to prepare, arming allies through the Lend-Lease Act, sending supplies, tanks, and planes to Britain and the Soviet Union. But still, America stayed out of direct battle. It was a sleeping giant, powerful but not yet awakened. That all changed on December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor, a quiet Sunday morning, turned into hell. Japanese aircraft roared out of the Pacific sky, striking the U.S. naval base in Hawaii. In just 2 hours, the pride of the American fleet was torn apart. Over 2,400 Americans were killed. The attack shocked the nation and the world. The next day, Roosevelt addressed Congress with words that would echo through history. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. With that speech, the sleeping giant finally awoke. The United States declared war on Japan, and within days, Hitler and Mussolini declared war on America. The greatest industrial power on earth had entered the deadliest war in history. America mobilizes. In months, America transformed itself from a peace-loving nation into the arsenal of democracy. Factories that once built cars now forged tanks, ships, and aircraft. Women filled the assembly lines, symbolized by Rosie the Riveter, strong, determined, and unstoppable. Every man, woman, and child became part of the war effort. From the deserts of Arizona to the steel mills of Detroit, the message was clear. Freedom was worth fighting for. By 1943, American might was undeniable. Thousands of planes took to the skies each month. New warships rolled out of shipyards faster than the Axis could sink them. And across the Atlantic, supplies poured into Britain, preparing for something huge. Something called Operation Overlord. The fate of the world would soon depend on one single day. The day when America would lead the greatest invasion in human history. That day was D-Day. For years, Hitler's armies had ruled Europe with an iron fist. From the beaches of France to the streets of Warsaw, Nazi flags flew over broken cities. Millions lived in fear, waiting for liberation. That liberation came from across the sea, carried by the stars and stripes. The Great Gamble. At dawn, over 156,000 Allied troops set sail across the English Channel. But among them, the heart and soul of the operation belonged to America. The U.S. Army's 1st Infantry Division, the 82nd and 101st Airborne, and thousands of brave soldiers who had never before faced real battle, all prepared to write history. The night before the invasion, President Franklin D. Roosevelt prayed for them. They fight not for the lust of conquest, but to end conquest. They fight to liberate. As dawn broke, the horizon was filled with American ships, a floating city of liberty, stretching as far as the eye could see. Battleships thundered, bombarding Nazi defenses. Paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines, and then came the moment every man feared, the landing at Omaha Beach. The longest day. When those landing craft doors opened, hell itself greeted them. German machine guns unleashed a storm of lead. The beach was chaos, smoke, fire, screams. Men fell before they could even touch the sand. But still, the Americans pushed forward. Young soldiers, some barely 19 years old, charged through blood-soaked waves for a cause they barely understood. But they knew one thing: freedom was worth it. It was the longest day, and yet by sunset, the impossible had happened. The Americans had broken through Hitler's Atlantic Wall. They had paid in blood, but they had opened the road to Europe's liberation. As the world watched, the tide of war turned. From that beachhead in Normandy, Allied forces began their unstoppable march toward Berlin. Villages cheered as American tanks rolled in. For the first time in years, the people of Europe saw their liberators, young men wearing the flag of the United States. The stars and stripes had become a symbol of hope. The march to victory. After D-Day, the American war machine never stopped. In just months, U.S. troops liberated Paris. They crossed the Rhine into Germany, destroying the Nazi dream piece by piece. Meanwhile, in the skies, the U.S. 8th Air Force rained destruction on enemy factories, railways, and oil fields. By 1945, the Nazis were running out of fuel, weapons, and morale. Inside his bunker in Berlin, Adolf Hitler faced the inevitable. The dream of a 1,000-year Reich had lasted barely 12. On May 8, 1945, the guns in Europe fell silent. It was Victory in Europe Day, VE Day. Crowds filled the streets of London, Paris, and New York, waving American flags. The world had been saved from tyranny, and America had led the charge. But the war wasn't over. Across the Pacific, another storm raged. Japan refused to surrender. Thousands of American soldiers were dying on distant islands. From Iwo Jima to Okinawa, the fight for freedom wasn't finished yet. Europe was free, but Asia still burned, and now the United States would face its greatest moral test, one that would change the world forever, the Empire of the Rising Sun. Japan's dream of empire had begun long before Pearl Harbor. It had conquered China, invaded Southeast Asia, and built a military machine driven by honor, discipline, and sacrifice. To the Japanese, surrender was shame. To America, surrender was survival. This clash of values would create one of the most savage conflicts in human history. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan's forces spread like wildfire, taking the Philippines, Guam, and the Dutch East Indies. For months, America was on the defensive. But under the leadership of Admiral Chester Nimitz and General Douglas MacArthur, the United States prepared to strike back. The first great test came at a place called Midway. The Battle of Midway, America's counterstrike. June 1942, the Pacific was vast, unpredictable, and unforgiving. Japan planned to lure the U.S. Navy into a trap near a small atoll called Midway Island. But American codebreakers had cracked Japan's secret communications. They knew the attack was coming. When the Japanese fleet arrived, the U.S. Navy was waiting. From the decks of the USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and USS Yorktown, American pilots launched into the sky, braving fire, wind, and almost certain death. Within minutes, they struck the heart of Japan's Navy. 4 of Japan's most powerful aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were destroyed. In just one day, the balance of power in the Pacific changed forever. Midway wasn't just a battle, it was revenge for Pearl Harbor. And the moment America seized control of the Pacific, island by island, the road to Tokyo. After Midway, America began a new kind of warfare, island hopping. From Guadalcanal to Tarawa, from Saipan to Iwo Jima, each island was a fortress, each victory paid for in blood. Soldiers fought in jungles where disease killed as many men as bullets. Marines stormed beaches under heavy fire, while Navy ships pounded enemy positions day and night. At Iwo Jima, the fighting was beyond imagination. The Japanese defenders swore to die rather than surrender. And yet, after weeks of horror, American Marines raised the flag on Mount Suribachi, a moment captured in one of the most iconic photographs of all time. That image wasn't just victory, it was a symbol of sacrifice, courage, and unity. It told the world America would never back down. The fire from the sky. As the Allies closed in on Japan, cities burned. American B-29 bombers, led by the legendary Curtis LeMay, began massive raids over Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya. Entire neighborhoods turned to ashes overnight. The scale of destruction was unimaginable, yet Japan refused to surrender. By mid-1945, the world faced a grim choice. An invasion of Japan could cost over 1 million American lives. President Harry S. Truman, who had succeeded Roosevelt, was handed a terrible decision. A weapon of unimaginable power, born from the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb. August 6, 1945, the world changed forever. A single B-29 bomber, Enola Gay, soared above Hiroshima. At 8:15 a.m., it released the first atomic bomb in history, Little Boy. In seconds, the city vanished in a blinding flash of light. Tens of thousands died instantly. 3 days later, another bomb fell on Nagasaki, Fat Man. The Japanese government, realizing the devastation, finally surrendered. For the first time in history, the power to destroy the world had been unleashed, and the United States carried that burden. The war ends. On September 2, 1945, aboard the battleship USS Missouri, Japan formally surrendered. The ceremony lasted only minutes, but it marked the end of 6 years of global war. Millions wept, prayed, and cheered as peace returned to the earth. In that moment, America stood as the most powerful nation in human history, not just because of its weapons, but because of its will to fight for something greater than itself: freedom. The cost of victory. In 1945, the planet was broken. Europe, once the center of civilization, was shattered. Germany was divided. Japan was a wasteland. Even the victors were exhausted. But America was different. Its homeland had never been bombed. Its industries were alive and booming. Its soldiers returned as heroes. And its ideals, freedom, democracy, and opportunity, stood taller than ever. The United States faced a choice: turn inward as it did after World War I, or lead the world into a new age of peace. President Harry S. Truman made that choice clear. America would not retreat. It would rebuild the world, not as an empire, but as a guardian of peace. Chapter 13. The Marshall Plan, Rebuilding a Broken Europe. In 1947, U.S. Secretary of State George C. Marshall announced one of the greatest humanitarian efforts in history: the Marshall Plan. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Instead of punishing the defeated nations, America would help them rise again. Billions of dollars in aid were sent to rebuild cities, factories, and homes in Western Europe. Within just a few years, Europe's economies were back on their feet. Germany, once the enemy, became a partner. France, Italy, and Britain flourished again. The streets that had seen tanks now saw trucks filled with food and tools, all stamped "Made in the USA." For the first time in history, a victorious nation used its power not to rule, but to heal. The Marshall Plan didn't just rebuild Europe, it rebuilt faith in humanity. Japan, from ashes to allies. Across the Pacific, America faced a different challenge: Japan. After the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the nation lay broken, both physically and spiritually. But instead of revenge, America offered redemption. Under the leadership of General Douglas MacArthur, Japan was transformed. Its military was dismantled, a new democratic constitution was written, and the Japanese people were given freedom of speech, voting rights, and education. In less than a generation, Japan went from a defeated empire to a thriving democracy, becoming one of America's closest allies. The war had begun in fear, but it ended in hope, and America had become the light that guided the world. A new world order. As Europe and Asia recovered, America took the lead in creating new systems for peace. In 1945, representatives from 50 nations gathered in San Francisco to form the United Nations, an institution dedicated to preventing another world war. And at its heart was the United States, the same nation that had crossed oceans to save freedom, now guiding humanity toward cooperation. America also helped establish the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and NATO, ensuring that nations would trade, prosper, and defend each other together. The age of American leadership had begun, not through conquest, but through compassion, innovation, and the promise of democracy. The Cold War begins. Yet peace came with new challenges. The Soviet Union, once America's wartime ally, became its rival. The world was divided between two ideologies: freedom and communism. But through every threat, from the Berlin airlift to the Korean War, America stood firm as the defender of liberty. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But its mission remained clear: to protect a world it had saved, and to ensure that tyranny never return. The Second World War had ended, but the struggle for peace had just begun. From the ashes of war, America had done something no nation had ever done before. It rebuilt its enemies, revived its allies, and set the foundation for a new global order that would last generations. In 1945, the world saw destruction, but in the years that followed, it saw rebirth. Powered by the courage, vision, and generosity of the United States of America, the guns of World War II were silent. But the story of America's heroism had only begun. Across continents, in oceans and skies, the United States had fought not for conquest, but for liberty, for democracy, and for a world free from tyranny. This was the legacy of a hero, the untold hero of the Second World War, the guardian of freedom. From the beaches of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific, American soldiers had faced the unimaginable. Millions had sacrificed their lives. Tanks, planes, ships, and bombs had turned the tide of history. But it was the spirit of America that truly changed the world. After the war, America did not retreat. It rebuilt Europe and Japan, helped establish the United Nations, and led the global effort to create peace and security. Its goal was clear: a world where freedom would survive, even in the face of tyranny. The American dream had become the world's hope. Lessons learned. World War II taught hard lessons. Evil could rise quickly, and the cost of inaction was unimaginable. But America showed that courage, determination, and moral clarity could overcome even the darkest times. It became a beacon, a symbol of industrial power turned to human good, a defender of democracy in Europe, Asia, and beyond. A nation willing to use its strength not to dominate, but to protect. Even in the tense years of the Cold War, America's role as a global guardian was evident, standing firm against threats to liberty, supporting allies, and preventing the return of tyranny. The human cost. No story of heroism is complete without remembering the cost. Over 400,000 Americans died in battle. Millions more were wounded or scarred for life. Every victory came at a price. Families shattered, communities grieving, generations forever changed. Yet through their sacrifice, the United States ensured that millions of others could live free from fear. Freedom had a price, and America paid it in full. The symbol of hope. From the Marshall Plan to the creation of NATO, from the reconstruction of Japan to the founding of the United Nations, America's influence shaped the modern world. The nation that had once been reluctant to enter a global conflict now led the fight for a safer, freer planet. Its ideals spread: democracy, liberty, and human rights became the standard for nations aspiring to peace. The flag of the United States became more than a banner of a nation. It became a symbol and a promise that tyranny would not prevail. America's ongoing mission. Even decades after the war, America continued to answer the call of freedom. From humanitarian missions to peacekeeping efforts, from fighting oppression to inspiring nations to rise above dictatorship, the United States remained the guardian of liberty. Its story reminds the world: courage matters, sacrifice matters, and when the world is in peril, heroes emerge, and sometimes from the most unexpected places. The untold hero. The hero of World War II was not a single soldier or a general. It was a nation, united in purpose, resolute in vision, and unwavering in the face of unimaginable odds. America saved the world, and not for glory, not for power, but for humanity itself. The beaches of Normandy, the islands of the Pacific, the streets of Europe and Asia, they all tell the same story. One nation's courage changed the course of history. From darkness, America brought light. From chaos, it built peace. From fear, it gave hope. This is the untold hero of World War II. This is the story of a nation that saved the world. From the beaches of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific, from the ashes of Europe to the rebirth of Japan, America rose as the untold hero of World War II. Its courage, sacrifice, and vision shaped the modern world and protected freedom for generations. This is the story of the nation that saved the world, a legacy of hope, strength, and freedom that continues to inspire us all.